I walked up to the judge during my divorce hearing and handed her a manila envelope. Just 30 seconds later, she looked directly at my husband and laughed. Not a polite smile. Not a quiet little chuckle. She actually laughed out loud. The entire courtroom went still. My husband's attorney stopped talking in the middle of his sentence. The woman sitting behind him, his new girlfriend, stared forward with a shocked expression. And my husband, Ryan Carter, the same man who had spent the last 6 months telling people that I was just a simple army officer who no longer fit into his successful new life, suddenly looked like he couldn't catch his breath. The color drained from his face. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table. The judge turned another page. Then another. After that, she looked up once more. "Mr. Carter," she said, still smiling, "in 22 years on this bench, I have never seen someone walk into my courtroom with this much confidence while carrying evidence that damages his own case this badly." The room became completely silent. Ryan swallowed nervously. He had absolutely no idea what was inside that envelope. But I knew. Because for 7 years, I had helped build the life he was living. And inside that envelope was everything. Every receipt. Every sacrifice, every promise, and every lie. The truth about betrayal is that it rarely begins with one major event. It starts with hundreds of small moments. A phone call that never comes. A distant look. A conversation that suddenly feels different. A person looking at you as though they no longer remember who you are. As I sat in that courtroom watching Ryan slowly realize that something had gone very wrong, my thoughts drifted back through the years. Back before the law degree. Before the expensive suits. Before the ego. Back to a time when he looked at me like I truly mattered. The courtroom carried the faint smell of old paper and furniture polish. The bright fluorescent lights above cast a pale glow across the polished wooden tables. Everything felt cold, clean, and sharp. Ryan sat across from me wearing a navy designer suit. I remembered when he owned only one suit. A cheap charcoal gray one we bought from a discount store because that was all we could afford at the time. Now he wore a watch that cost more than the bonus I received from my first deployment. It's amazing how success can change people. Or maybe success simply reveals who they were all along. His attorney stood beside him and spoke with confidence. "Your Honor, my client earned everything he has through his own hard work and determination." He continued. "Mr. Carter graduated near the top of his law school class and recently secured a highly respected position with one of the state's most prestigious law firms." The attorney moved slowly across the room. Everything about him seemed practiced and polished. Mrs. Carter served in the military throughout the marriage. However, she made no meaningful contribution to Mr. Carter's professional achievements and does not possess similar earning potential. He paused briefly before adding, "My client is requesting a fair dissolution of the marriage with a modest support arrangement. No meaningful contribution." Those words hit me hard. For a moment, I stared down at my folded hands. The same hands that loaded cargo planes during freezing weather. The same hands that signed deployment orders. The same hands that mailed paycheck after paycheck while Ryan sat in classrooms working toward his dream career. No meaningful contribution. I nearly laughed. Seated beside me was my attorney, Sarah Mitchell. Sarah had been my best friend since high school. She knew every part of my story. The deployments. The sacrifices. The lonely nights spent crying in military housing on the other side of the world because I missed my husband. The years I spent believing we were building a future together. Sarah gently squeezed my arm beneath the table. I knew exactly what she meant. Stay calm. Not yet. Ryan's attorney continued speaking. "My client has generously agreed to allow Mrs. Carter to keep her vehicle and personal belongings. He seeks nothing from her because there is essentially nothing of value to pursue." Nothing of value. There it was again. Another insult. I looked toward Ryan. He didn't correct his attorney. He didn't object. He didn't defend me. Instead, he sat there nodding in agreement. This was the same man who cried when I left for my first overseas deployment. The same man who once told me I was the strongest woman he had ever known. Now he looked at me like I was simply a problem he wanted removed from his life. A reminder of a past he wanted to erase. Sitting behind him was Vanessa Brooks, 29 years old. A corporate attorney. Perfect blonde hair. Perfect smile. The kind of life that appears flawless from the outside. She shifted slightly in her seat and crossed her legs. Ryan had first described her as a colleague. Then she became a friend, then a mentor. And somehow, just weeks after filing for divorce, she became his girlfriend. Funny how quickly those transitions happen. Eventually, Ryan's attorney finished and sat down. Ryan leaned back comfortably in his chair. He looked completely convinced that he had already won. Then Sarah slowly stood. The courtroom immediately became quiet. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "before the court considers any proposed settlement, we would like to submit additional evidence." Judge Reynolds nodded. "Proceed." Sarah looked at me. Just one quick glance. That was the signal. The moment we had spent weeks preparing for. My heart pounded in my chest. I bent down and picked up the manila envelope beside my chair. It felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the papers inside. Because of what those papers represented. 7 years. 7 years of believing in someone. 7 years of putting their dream ahead of your own comfort. 7 years of trust. I stood up. Every person in the courtroom watched. My shoes tapped softly against the floor as I walked toward the judge's bench. Ryan frowned. He looked confused. For the first time that morning, uncertainty appeared on his face. I reached the bench. Judge Reynolds accepted the envelope with a professional nod. Then I turned around and returned to my seat. The courtroom remained silent. The judge opened the envelope. She removed the documents inside. The first page, then the second, then the third. At first, her expression revealed nothing. Professional. Neutral. Impossible to read. Then her eyebrows lifted slightly. She turned another page. Looked up at Ryan. Then back down at the documents. She kept reading. A small smile appeared. Then she turned another page. The smile grew wider. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His attorney leaned forward. Vanessa stopped moving entirely. The judge reached the final document. She read it carefully. Very carefully. And then she laughed. A genuine laugh. Warm. Unrestrained. Completely unexpected. That was the exact moment Ryan Carter realized that the version of our marriage he had been telling everyone was about to fall apart. The judge's laughter lasted only a few seconds, but in that courtroom, it felt much longer. Long enough for Ryan's confidence to disappear. Long enough for Vanessa Brooks' smile to fade. And long enough for me to experience something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Judge Reynolds took a breath and regained her composure. She lightly touched the corner of her eye before looking straight at Ryan. "Mr. Carter," she said calmly, "I believe there are some very important facts about this marriage that have not been presented to this court." Ryan swallowed hard. His attorney immediately rose to his feet. "Your Honor." The judge lifted one hand. That was all it took. The attorney sat down without another word. "I think," Judge Reynolds continued while tapping the documents with her fingertips, "that we need to revisit how Mr. Carter became an attorney in the first place." A heavy silence settled over the courtroom. Sarah glanced at me and gave a small nod. And just like that, my thoughts drifted back. 7 years into the past. Back before the courtroom. Before the lies. Before success changed everything. Back when Ryan and I were simply two young people trying to create a future together. 7 years earlier, I was 25 years old and serving as a first lieutenant in the United States Army. Ryan was 24. We lived in a small apartment near Fort Liberty. It wasn't an impressive place. The carpet showed years of wear. The kitchen cabinets squeaked every time they were opened. During the summer, the air conditioner rattled constantly. But we loved that apartment because it belonged to us. Ryan worked part-time at a bookstore while preparing for the LSAT. Every evening after I finished my duties, I would come home tired and find him sitting at our small dining table surrounded by law school preparation books. The moment I walked through the door, his face would brighten. "How was your day, Captain America?" he would ask with a grin. I would laugh. Then he would kiss my forehead. Simple moments. The kind of memories that seem ordinary at the time but become priceless later. Ryan had dreamed of becoming a lawyer since he was a teenager. He talked about it all the time. Back then, it wasn't about money. At least, it didn't seem that way. He spoke about helping people, about standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves, about fighting for justice. And I believed every word he said. Then one day, the acceptance letter arrived. I can still remember that moment clearly. I walked into our apartment wearing my uniform and saw Ryan standing motionless in the middle of the living room. An envelope was clutched in his hand. His hands were trembling. For a brief second, I thought something terrible had happened. Then he looked up at me. His eyes were full of tears. I got in. I dropped my bag. What? I got in, Emma. His voice cracked with emotion. Harper Law School accepted me. We both started crying. Then we started laughing. We danced around that tiny apartment like two people who had just won the lottery. For one perfect evening, everything felt right. Then reality showed up. Tuition, books, housing, transportation, school fees, thousands and thousands of dollars. Much more money than either of us had. For weeks, our kitchen table was covered with paperwork. Student loans would help, but they wouldn't cover everything. There was still a huge financial gap. One evening, Ryan pushed the papers aside and rubbed both hands across his face. I can't do it. I looked up. What do you mean? I can't afford this. His voice was barely audible. I'm going to decline. The room suddenly felt smaller. No. Ryan looked at me. I reached across the table and held his hand. You've wanted this your entire life. We can't pay for it. We'll find a way. He shook his head. No, we won't. But I had already made my decision. The Army was offering additional assignments, extended training rotations, overseas deployments, hazard pay, separation pay, assignments most people tried to avoid, dangerous assignments, long assignments. I volunteered for every single one. The first deployment lasted 9 months. The second lasted nearly a year. Then came another, and another. Every time, I packed my duffel bag and prepared to leave. And every time, Ryan promised me it would all be worth it. Those first few years were difficult. Much more difficult than most people outside military life could understand. I spent holidays in temporary housing on the other side of the world. Birthdays came and went through video calls. Anniversaries were celebrated through weak internet connections. Sometimes I watched Ryan blow out birthday candles through a laptop screen. Sometimes he watched me eat Thanksgiving dinner in a military dining hall. But month after month, I sent money home. Every month without fail. Tuition payments, housing expenses, books, exam costs, parking fees, anything he needed. Everything was covered. Sending those checks became normal. Making sacrifices became normal. And eventually, the loneliness became normal too. I learned how to sleep alone, how to celebrate milestones alone, how to carry the weight of missing someone every single day. But I never complained. Because in those years, Ryan always seemed grateful. Whenever I came home on leave, he would hold me tightly and refuse to let go. I couldn't do this without you. He said it all the time, again and again. I'll never forget everything you're doing for me. One winter evening during his second year of law school, we were sitting together on the couch while snow drifted down outside the window. Ryan rested his head on my shoulder. When I graduate, he said quietly, I'm going to spend the rest of my life paying you back for all of this. I smiled. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. His voice was completely serious. Everything. And I believed him. God help me, I believed every single word. I believed every single word he said. By the time Ryan reached his third year of law school, things were finally falling into place. His grades were outstanding. He ranked near the top of his class. Professors spoke highly of him. Internship opportunities started appearing. Well-known law firms began showing interest. And I was proud. Incredibly proud. Every achievement he earned felt like something we had accomplished together. Every new opportunity felt like proof that all the sacrifices had been worth it. What I didn't see at the time was that success was slowly changing him. Not all at once. Not in a way that was obvious. The first warning signs seemed harmless. Ryan started talking more often about classmates who came from wealthy families, students who drove luxury cars, students whose parents were judges, partners, and powerful attorneys. At first, he sounded impressed. Then he sounded jealous. And eventually, something else entirely. One evening, during a video call while I was stationed in Germany, he told me about a networking dinner he had attended. "You should have seen that place," he said. I smiled. "That fancy?" He laughed. "You have no idea." Then he paused and added something that felt strange. "Everyone there was so polished." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He shrugged. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Months later, I would understand exactly what he meant. Because somewhere along the way, Ryan Carter stopped admiring those people. He started wanting to become one of them. And when people become desperate to belong to a different world, they often begin by distancing themselves from the world they came from. The transformation wasn't sudden. That's what made it dangerous. If Ryan had become cruel overnight, I would have noticed immediately. If he had woken up one morning acting like a completely different person, I would have confronted it. But that's rarely how change happens. People drift. One small step at a time. One compromise at a time. One broken promise at a time. And before you realize it, the person standing in front of you still looks familiar, but no longer feels familiar at all. The first time I truly sensed it, I had just returned from a 10-month deployment. I still remember walking through the airport terminal with my duffel bag hanging from one shoulder. My uniform felt heavy. Every muscle in my body ached. I hadn't slept properly in nearly 2 days. But none of that mattered. Ryan was waiting for me. Or at least I thought he was. I spotted him near the baggage claim area. He looked good. Really good. Better than I remembered. The part-time bookstore employee was gone. The struggling law student was gone. Standing there was a confident professional wearing a tailored jacket, expensive shoes, and a flawless haircut. For a moment, I felt proud of him. Then something felt off. When he hugged me, it was quick, polite, distracted, not cold. Not yet. Just different. I pushed the feeling aside. People grow. People change. Long-distance marriages are difficult. That's what I told myself. On the drive home, Ryan talked almost the entire time. But not about us. Not about how much he had missed me. Not about our future. Instead, he talked about his internship. The partners. The clients. The networking events. The important connections. The opportunities waiting for him. I listened and smiled because I genuinely wanted him to succeed. Then, at one point, he glanced at my uniform. "You still wear that style?" I laughed. "It's the army, Ryan." "Yeah." He smiled. But something about that smile felt strange. It wasn't the way someone looks at the person they love. It felt more like he was studying me, judging me, evaluating me. That uncomfortable feeling stayed with me the rest of the evening. A few weeks later, I attended one of his networking events. Honestly, I wasn't excited about it. Large social gatherings had never been my favorite thing. Put me in a military briefing room with 50 officers, and I'd be completely comfortable. Put me in a ballroom full of corporate attorneys, and I'd feel like I had walked into the wrong event. Still, Ryan wanted me there. At least, that's what he said. I spent nearly an hour getting ready. I wore the nicest dress I owned. A simple navy blue dress. Nothing flashy. Nothing expensive. Just clean, classic, and elegant. When I walked out of the bedroom, Ryan looked up. For a moment, I expected his face to light up. Instead, he hesitated. "You look nice." Something about that pause bothered me. Nice. A second later, he corrected himself. "I mean, you look great." But I had already noticed it. The hesitation. The comparison happening silently behind his eyes. At the event, I met dozens of people. Attorneys. Partners. Associates. Executives. Judges. Most were polite. Some were genuinely friendly. Others looked at me with a curiosity they tried to hide. One woman asked where I worked. "The Army," I replied. Her smile stiffened. "Oh." That was all she said. Just one word. But I knew exactly what it meant. Later that evening, I found Ryan talking with a group of attorneys. Standing beside him was a tall blonde woman. Confident. Attractive. Perfectly dressed. The type of person who looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. Ryan introduced us. Emma, this is Vanessa Brooks. Vanessa smiled warmly. At least, it appeared warm. I've heard so much about you. I smiled back. Hopefully good things. Of course. But then something happened. She looked at Ryan. Not at me. At Ryan. And something passed between them. Just a glance. Quick. Subtle. Easy to miss. Most people probably would have missed it. I didn't. Military training teaches you to notice details. Body language. Eye contact. Micro-expressions. Tiny shifts that reveal much more than words. A small feeling of discomfort settled in my stomach. Nothing serious. Not yet. Over the following year, Ryan's career took off. His internship became a full-time position. His salary doubled. Then nearly doubled again. The firm loved him. Clients loved him. Everyone seemed to love him. Yet the more successful he became, the more uncomfortable he seemed around me. The comments started small. You should update your wardrobe. You should try a different hairstyle. You don't have to wear military jackets all the time. At first, I laughed them off. Then the comments became more frequent. More personal. More critical. One evening, I came home exhausted after training exercises. I was covered in dust and dirt. Ryan looked up briefly from his laptop. You know, most women your age spend more time taking care of themselves. I stared at him. What? I'm just saying. His eyes dropped back to the screen. You've kind of stopped trying. The words hurt more than I expected, because for 7 years, trying was exactly what I had been doing. Trying for our marriage. Trying for our future. Trying for him. Trying to keep a relationship alive across countries, time zones, continents, and oceans. But somehow, none of that seemed to matter anymore. As the months passed, Ryan's criticism became a regular part of my life. Nothing seemed good enough anymore. My clothes. My hairstyle. My hobbies. My friends. Even my career. Everything became something he felt needed fixing. One evening, he invited me to a charity gala organized by his law firm. I arrived straight from a military function. I was dressed professionally. I looked presentable. At least, I thought I did. The moment Ryan saw me, his expression changed. He frowned. What? I asked. He looked away. Nothing. Ryan? He let out a sigh. You just stand out. I laughed lightly. That's usually what a military uniform does. No. His voice became sharper. Not like that. The conversation ended right there. But the damage didn't. Because for the first time, I understood something that hurt more than I wanted to admit. Ryan wasn't proud of my service anymore. He was embarrassed by it. That realization settled heavily inside me. Around that same period, Vanessa Brooks became a constant presence in our lives. At first, it seemed harmless. Or at least that's what I told myself. Vanessa helped with a case. Vanessa introduced a client. Vanessa organized an event. Vanessa told the funniest story today. Every conversation somehow included her name. Every work story. Every dinner conversation. Every networking event. Vanessa. 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 One evening, I finally decided to say something. Do you realize how often you talk about her? Ryan immediately looked up. His expression darkened. Seriously? It was just a question. No. His voice turned colder. It wasn't. I stared at him. What is that supposed to mean? It means you're insecure. The accusation caught me completely off guard. Insecure? You're always suspicious. I almost laughed. Always? This was the first time I had ever mentioned Vanessa. But something inside me told me not to push the argument further. I could feel the distance between us growing wider. And honestly, I was afraid of making it worse. The breaking point came 8 months later. I remember every detail of that night. The rain tapping against the windows. The smell of fresh coffee lingering in the apartment. The sound of traffic moving through the streets below. Ryan stood beside the kitchen island holding a glass of whiskey. I stood across from him. And for the first time in 7 years, neither of us was pretending everything was fine. You're different, I said quietly. His jaw tightened. So are you. I slowly shook my head. No. I'm still the same person. Ryan let out a short, cold laugh. A sound I had never heard from him before. Then he said the words that shattered everything. That's the problem, Emma. My stomach tightened. He looked directly at me. The simplicity of your life exhausts me. The room went silent. For a second, I honestly thought I had heard him wrong. What? The army. The routines. The way you think. The way you live. His expression became even harder. I've outgrown it. The room suddenly felt smaller. Ryan took another drink from his glass. Then came the final blow. The truth is, you're not the woman I need anymore. I couldn't find any words. You don't belong in the life I've built. My chest tightened painfully. Then he delivered the sentence I would never forget. You aren't worthy of the future I want. Everything seemed to stop. 7 years. 7 years of sacrifice. 7 years of deployments. 7 years of believing in him. Reduced to a single judgment. Not worthy. 3 weeks later, Ryan Carter filed for divorce. And neither of us realized at the time that his biggest mistake wasn't leaving me. His biggest mistake was believing I had nothing left to fight back with. The hardest part of heartbreak isn't always the moment it happens. It's everything that follows. The silence. The emptiness. The routines that suddenly feel meaningless. For weeks after Ryan left, I moved through my days almost automatically. I went to work. Attended briefings. Completed training exercises. Smiled when people expected me to smile. Then I returned home to an apartment that suddenly felt much larger than before. At night, I would sit alone in the dark living room and stare out at the city lights beyond the window. 7 years. 7 years of my life. Gone. Not because we failed together. Not because we both stopped trying. But because one person decided that success mattered more than loyalty. The divorce papers arrived 12 days after Ryan moved out. I opened the envelope while sitting at my kitchen table. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. The settlement proposal was almost unbelievable. Ryan wanted almost everything. Most of the assets. Most of the investments. Most of the savings. In return, he offered me a small settlement payment that didn't even come close to covering what I had spent helping him through law school. But what hurt most wasn't the money. It was the wording. No significant contribution. Limited financial involvement. Minimal impact on professional advancement. I read those phrases once. Then again. Then a third time. Each reading felt worse than the last. By the time I reached the 4th page, I stopped. I couldn't continue. I simply sat there staring at the paperwork. 7 years of deployments. 7 years of tuition payments. 7 years of sacrifice. And according to Ryan's attorney, I had contributed almost nothing. That night, Sarah came over. When she arrived, she found me exactly where I had been 3 hours earlier. The divorce papers were still spread across the table. A cup of coffee sat beside them, completely untouched and long since cold. Sarah quietly took a seat across from me. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. Finally, she picked up the documents. She read through several pages, then slowly shook her head. They're lying. I looked up. Sarah carefully folded the papers. Then she shook her head again. No. Her voice was firm. Let me say that differently. She leaned forward. They're counting on you not being able to prove they're lying. Something about the way she said it immediately got my attention. For the first time in weeks, I looked directly at her. What do you mean? Sarah narrowed her eyes. I mean, Ryan's entire case depends on one thing. What thing? That you didn't keep records. I blinked. Sarah continued. Let me ask you something. She folded her hands together. How much money did you send Ryan while he was in law school? I laughed bitterly. I honestly don't know. Take a guess. I stared out the window for a moment. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Maybe even more. Deployment pay. Housing allowances. Hazard pay. Overseas bonuses. Most of it went to Ryan. Sarah slowly nodded. Good. I frowned. Good. Yes. She leaned back. Because records exist somewhere. That conversation changed everything. Over the following weeks, Sarah became completely focused on one mission: finding every piece of evidence Ryan hoped no one would ever see. There was only one way to describe Sarah during those weeks. She was obsessed. Every evening after work, I would walk into my apartment and find her sitting at my dining table surrounded by paperwork. Bank statements, tax returns, loan records, financial disclosures, military pay summaries, stack after stack of documents. Slowly, my dining room stopped looking like part of an apartment and started looking like a command center. And Sarah approached the entire process exactly the way a military strategist would: carefully, systematically, without missing a single detail. One evening, she waved me over. "Sit down." I pulled out a chair. "What did you find?" Without saying a word, Sarah turned her laptop toward me. "Look." The screen was filled with rows of numbers. Deposits, transfers, withdrawals, years of financial activity. "Do you see it?" At first, I didn't. The numbers looked random. Then the pattern became clear. Month after month, year after year. Money moving from my account into Ryan's. Thousands of dollars. Again and again. Sarah pointed at one entry. Tuition. Then another. Books. Another. Housing. Another. Exam fees. My stomach tightened. Seeing all of it together was overwhelming. I always knew I had supported Ryan. What I hadn't realized was just how much I had given. Then Sarah found something even bigger. About a week later, she burst through my apartment door carrying an old storage box. For the first time in weeks, she looked excited. "What?" I asked. She dropped the box onto the table. "Help me." For nearly 2 hours, we sorted through old paperwork. Receipts, tax records, military orders, photographs, folders filled with forgotten documents. Then suddenly, Sarah stopped moving. She reached into the bottom of the box and carefully pulled out a folder. Her eyes widened. "Emma." Something in her voice instantly made my pulse race. "What is it?" Slowly, she opened the folder. Inside were several documents. One of them was a loan agreement. My loan agreement. Immediately, the memory came back. 7 years earlier, during Ryan's second year of law school, a financial aid problem had nearly forced him to leave school. I remembered the panic, the sleepless nights, the fear in his voice. Without hesitation, I had taken out a personal loan. $48,000. In my name. My responsibility. My risk. Somehow, over the years, I had forgotten about it. Sarah hadn't. She flipped through the pages until she reached the final document. Then she smiled. A slow, satisfied smile. The kind lawyers get when they discover something extremely valuable. "Emma." "What?" She handed me the last page. I looked down. Then I looked again. My breath caught. At the bottom of the document was Ryan's signature. A notarized repayment agreement. A promissory note signed by Ryan Carter himself. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Oh my God." Sarah let out a quiet laugh. "Exactly." The document clearly stated that the money had been used to support his legal education. It also stated that the loan would be repaid once he entered professional practice. A legally enforceable promise. A promise Ryan had apparently forgotten existed. I leaned back in my chair. My heart was pounding. For the first time since the divorce proceedings began, I felt the direction of the case starting to change. The story Ryan had been telling was beginning to crack. But Sarah wasn't done. Not even close. A few days later, she received Ryan's financial disclosures through Discovery. And that's when everything truly exploded. I still remember the silence in the room. Sarah read through the documents, looked up at me, then looked back down again. Finally, she said, "You're not going to believe this." My stomach immediately tightened. "What?" Without a word, she slid the papers across the table. I read them once, then twice, then a third time, because surely I was misunderstanding something. But I wasn't. 3 months before filing for divorce, Ryan had transferred $127,000 from marital accounts. The recipient? Vanessa Brooks. My chest tightened. "What is this?" Sarah pointed to the transaction description. It read, "Strategic investment, I laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. Investment. Sarah crossed her arms. That's what he's calling it. The room became very quiet. Neither of us needed to say what we were both thinking. Ryan had secretly moved marital assets to the woman he was involved with. Without my knowledge. Without my permission. And without disclosing it. Sarah's expression hardened. He just handed us the entire case. That night, we worked for hours. Building timelines. Organizing records. Matching transactions. Connecting every piece of evidence. And every document pointed to the same conclusion. Ryan had not built his success alone. He had built it with my support. My money. My sacrifices. My years of service. And once he reached the top, he tried to erase the person who helped him get there. Eventually, Sarah placed a large manila envelope in front of me. The envelope. The same one that would later end up in Judge Reynolds' hands. Inside it was everything. The loan documents. The promissory note. The repayment agreement. The bank records. The transfer records. Years of evidence. Years of truth. Sarah pushed the envelope toward me. When the time comes, she said quietly, you hand this directly to the judge. I looked down at it. The envelope felt heavier than paper. Heavier than documents. It felt like 7 years of my life. And somewhere else in the city, Ryan Carter was preparing for court. Completely unaware that the evidence he believed was gone forever was about to walk into that courtroom with me. As I watched Judge Reynolds laugh, I felt something inside me finally begin to loosen. The weight I had been carrying for nearly a year started lifting. Not because Ryan was suffering, and not because I wanted revenge, but because the truth had finally entered the room. And unlike people, the truth doesn't leave when it becomes inconvenient. The courtroom remained silent. Ryan's attorney looked stunned, as if the ground beneath him had suddenly disappeared. Vanessa sat motionless in the gallery. Ryan looked confused, then concerned, then terrified. Judge Reynolds placed the final document on the bench and folded her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, dangerously calm. Mr. Carter, your attorney informed this court that your wife made no meaningful contribution to your professional advancement. She lifted the promissory note. Would you care to explain this document? Ryan stared at it. The color drained from his face. The judge waited. I remember the loan. His voice sounded completely different now. Much weaker than it had been earlier that morning. Judge Reynolds raised an eyebrow. You remember it? Yes. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. But that was years ago. The judge glanced down at the document. Years ago. Then she looked back at him. Mr. Carter, this is a legally binding repayment agreement acknowledging that your wife personally financed a substantial portion of your legal education. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had been said all day. Ryan remained silent. The judge continued. And according to these financial records, Mrs. Carter also covered the majority of your living expenses while you attended law school. Ryan's attorney quickly stood up. Your Honor, even if those contributions existed, they do not necessarily. Sit down. Judge Reynolds didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The attorney immediately returned to his seat. The judge turned another page. Then another. Then another.